This is a lecture on the section of chapter 3, including the anatomy of a neuron. And you'll have to forgive me, I majored in psychology, not anatomy, so I can't go into full detail about the anatomy of a neuron, but we can at least look at the parts and a basic diagram of what it looks like. First, a quote from a book. The nervous system is composed of two basic cell types, the glial cells and neurons, which neurons are what obviously we're going to be looking at. Glial cells are traditionally thought to play a supportive role to neurons, both physically and metabolically. Glial cells provide scaffolding on which the nervous system is built. They help neurons line up closely with each other to allow the neuronal communication. They provide insulation to the neurons. They transport nutrients and waste products and mediate immune responses. Neurons, on the other hand, serve as interconnecting information processes that are essential for all the tasks of the nervous system. So the nervous system is made up of neurons, and that's how communication flows through the body, is through neurons. So let's go through the parts of a neuron. First, it is a semi-permeable membrane. Like the outer surface of a neuron is semi-permeable, which means that it's selectively permeable. It allows, for example, some molecules to go through, but blocks others from moving across the membrane. A good example would be your skin. As we know, it lets water or sweat out, but there are many harmful things it does not let in. Everything can't go through your skin. So it lets some things out and lets some things in, but not everything. So let's look at a picture. Might be a little easier to imagine if we look at a picture, the structure of a neuron. So you can see there's the dendrite, there's the nucleus or the soma of the neuron, there's the axon where transmission occurs. The Schwann cell is part of the axon, myelin sheath, and then the nerve ending. So let's go through each one of those parts and discuss briefly what each part does. The soma. This is the cell body of a neuron, and it contains the nucleus of the cell. The soma doesn't really play an active role in transmitting the neural signals, but it keeps the cell functioning and holds the cell's DNA. Dendrites, which you saw are the branch extensions off the soma. These are input sites where signals are received from other neurons, and these signals are then transmitted electrically across the soma. The axons. That you saw that as the connector between two neurons. Each neuron in your brain has one long cable that snakes away from the main part of the cell, and this cable, several times thinner than a human hair, which is hard to imagine, but that's how small the axons are that connect each neuron. This is where electrical impulses from the neuron travel away from one neuron to be received by other neurons. The terminal buttons are what you would call nerve endings in the diagram, or electrical impulses travel from the axon into multiple terminal buttons. So it goes from the soma, from the one neuron, through the axon into the terminal buttons of another neuron. This, also known as the synaptic knob, is a small bulge at the end of an axon that stores and releases neurotransmitters. It forms junctions with other neurons, allowing for the communication between neurons. Just to define neurotransmitters, those are the chemical messengers of the nervous system. So that's what's being transferred from one neuron to another neuron. An example of a chemical messenger that probably most of you have heard of is serotonin. We know that serotonin contributes to depression. So that's an example of one of the chemicals that travels from neuron to neuron. The myelin sheath coats the axon and acts as an insulator, increasing the speed at which the electrical signal travels. The myelin sheath is made up of Schwann cells, if you remember that from the diagram. The synaptic cleft is the space between two neurons in which neurotransmitters are transferred from the terminal buttons of one neuron to the dendrites of another neuron. So that's just the break between the neurons where these signals are transmitted. Specific neurotransmitters fit specific receptors, similar to how a key fits a lock. The neurotransmitter binds to any receptor that it fits. So all neurotransmitters don't fit all receptors. It only binds to the one that it fits. Now let's look at a diagram of that. So this is a more just close-up diagram of what's actually happening with a synaptic transmission. As you can see, there's one neuron, the nerve impulse. Neurotransmitters go into the gap, and then you can see the terminal buttons there. Some neurotransmitters, as we just said, will fit into those buttons, but not all will fit. And then the nerve impulse carries on. So that's just how it happens, an electrical chemical impulse that goes from one neuron to the next. And that's basically all I have about genetics, just some parts of the neuron. Again, I'm certainly not an expert on anatomy, but hopefully giving you a basic idea of those parts of the neuron was helpful. But please let me know if you have any questions. We can find an answer together.